Hey everybody, Wolfie here. First recording that I'm uploading, hopefully, from my new phone. I got a Galaxy Fold 4 for no good reason, really. My Galaxy Note 20 Ultra was just fine, nothing wrong with it, but they dangled a $900 credit, trade-in credit in front of me, and then like a half-off thing for a Galaxy Tab S8 Plus, and so the consumer in me couldn't resist, and I pulled the trigger on both, and yay. I'm actually really impressed with the Fold. It's just an amazing little phone. That whole folding screen thing, it sounds like such a cheesy gimmick until you get it in your hands and open it up and realize, holy crap, I'm holding like a 6-inch screen that can play. It's just beautiful. It really is. And it's got a second screen when it's closed, so there's actually two screens on the thing, so it'll act like a regular candy bar phone, but then you can also just crank it open and get double the real estate. Beautiful device. And the tablet, holy crap, that thing's good too. They're bloody fast. Both these things are just astonishingly fast. Anyway, I want to talk about something different, though. I really want to talk about Kiwi Farms, but I'm going to save that for another video because I've got more to say about that. Suffice to say, fuck everybody trying to kill it, and you're not going to manage to. We are more stubborn than you are solvent, so just keep that in mind. You've pissed off a whole lot of technologically savvy people who happen to have a rebellious streak, so good fucking luck taking it down for good. We're going to come back, and we're going to come back so hard that you're not going to be able to take it down. You're driving innovation. Just remember that. Trying to silence free speech, you're actually going to drive innovation that will protect free speech pretty much forever. Anyway, more on that in another video. I want to talk about a related topic. This took me by surprise yesterday when I saw it. I like reading the Register occasionally. They're a bit of an irreverent news outlet that talks about the IT industry, and they are unfortunately very liberal and when they get onto politics, God help you. And naturally, they hated the Orange Menace, but their coverage is generally okay. Although they towed the line with, Kiwi Farms is offline now. This stupid murder site with a death count. They're evil, blah. Fuck you. But I got to see an interesting bit of news, and this tickles me, and so does the seething. Oh my God, there are people pissed about this. So Texas passed yet another really neat law sometime last year, explicitly banning big sites like Facebook, Meta, Twitter, Google, Alphabet, YouTube, all them, from banning people pretty much for anything, apart from actual violations of law or legitimate violations against, trying to hack the site or overwhelm it or DDoS it or whatever. They really did clamp down on these companies banning you because you offended somebody. And this is astonishing that a government agency of any kind or a government legislature, even if it's just state level, would have the balls to do it. And I'm really impressed. Good job, Texas. Now, naturally, the big tech pussies, being the censorious wimps that they are, immediately bellyached, and they sued to stop it. Because of course they did. They're fighting really hard, everybody, for the right to censor you. Keep that in mind. So they sued, and some state level court, I think, issued an injunction to prevent the law from taking effect, but the state immediately appealed, and the appellate court stayed the stay, or the injunction. So the law is in effect, I think. But anyway, then the appellate court heard the case. And the interesting, and I love this novel idea that that big tech emerged with. that they have the First Amendment right to literally cancel somebody's First Amendment rights. They argued that, this is compelled speech. You can't force us to let people say what they want on our private property. And the appellate court, now the Register reported this as appellate court under fire for blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, wait a minute. It's a court. They don't give a fuck who's pissed at them. And, they're there to deal with law, not feelings, which is so refreshing. But anyway, the appellate court upheld the ruling that said, they upheld the Texas law, saying, hey, freedom of speech is explicitly enumerated in the First Amendment. Your implied, non-enumerated, imaginary right to stomp on somebody else's free speech, no, you don't get to do that. And of course, the usual suspects are all sorts of pissed off about, this is a First Amendment issue. Like, yeah, it is, just not the way you think it is. And it's funny, I wonder how these same people felt about the case in Colorado where that bakery refused to make a gay wedding cake that was deeply offensive to the person making the cakes. Because I remember they were really upset, and that went to the Supreme Court. People were really pissed about not being able to force that baker to, they wanted to compel his speech, and they were really angry that they couldn't. Now they want protection and don't want to have compelled speech. Though the court saw through that argument too. This isn't compelled speech. This is more common carrier type stuff. The telephone company can't cut off your service because you drop an N-bomb on a phone call with your mother, or because you talk about liking Donald Trump. And that's illegal. That's actually a violation of I forget which law it is. It's a regulation that you cannot, it's common carrier status because it's acknowledged that you have a de facto monopoly, and it's impractical for anybody else to compete with you. So, in exchange for not coming after you for antitrust, because it's not really realistic, you've got some other expectations on you that you need to uphold. And one of those is, they don't get to editorialize. And they don't get to ban or kick people off the telephone network for saying things they don't like. That's not compelled speech. The company isn't saying those things. The people using the service provided by the company are saying those things. And so that's why this argument that, you're compelling these social media companies to say things they don't want. No, they're not. They're preventing others from saying what they want. Nobody's making Google say, we love Trump. Nobody's trying to make Facebook say that, gun rights are important. Nobody's making anybody say anything. They're preventing you from blocking other people's free speech. Now, the other angle of attack they have against this ruling and against this law in Texas is this entire notion of, it's back to the same old crap that, free speech only applies to government agencies. It's the First Amendment, but that only applies to public entities like government agencies and stuff. Private enterprise can do what it wants, and we own all of this. We own the platform, so we can kick anybody off that we want to. Not so fast. For one thing, that's a crucial misunderstanding and I think deliberate misrepresentation of what the First Amendment is, and the Bill of Rights entirely. The Bill of Rights does not grant any rights. You don't get any kind of rights from the Constitution. None. The Constitution recognizes existing rights you already have. You are born with these rights. They are natural rights you have. The way the Constitution puts it is that we are endowed by our Creator, whoever that is. You're born with these rights. Free speech is automatic. The Bill of Rights just recognizes, enumerates, and protects them. So, even though technically speaking, a shithead California company banning you in Florida for saying something that offends some shithead in Canada is not violating the First Amendment. But they are certainly violating your right to freedom of speech. There's no getting around that. So legally, they might, and that's a big might, be correct or not breaking the law. But morally, ethically, they absolutely are trouncing free speech. And there's no, they really, people need to push back on this idea that that the First Amendment only applies to government. The law only prevents government from abridging free speech, but that's just enshrining an existing right. So somebody privately censoring you is absolutely denying you your right to free speech. Never forget that. But anyway, there's another angle that these people always forget about. I imagine a bunch of them don't even know this, and so I'm going to educate you. So this argument that, oh, well, it's a private company, private platform, private property, we can do what we want. So there was this, oh my God, I wish I could remember the name of the case. I'll put it in the description of this video because this one's super important. Because it did set precedent, and I am very confident that that precedent applies here too. So there was, back in the 1800s and 1900s, early 1900s, during the gold rush, mostly, we got the notion, or we started to see the emergence of a so-called company town, where some company needs to mine or drill something, and they're going to be there a while, and they need a lot of staff, a lot of personnel. And we're talking long-term, like years, 2 or 3 years. So they built kind of ramshackle towns so that workers could move their entire family up into the mountains or wherever to do the work. And they just all lived there. And it was called a company town, because the company itself owned the whole thing, all the property, all the buildings, everything, lock, stock, and barrel. And the employees didn't pay rent, but of course they were paid a reduced salary. They earned reduced wages because, they were earning rent by working. And back in the day, that was a rip, because, they paid them in scrit or, oh, shut up, car. Right. Okay. Shut that door. So workers got paid in company fun bucks, basically. And so it wasn't real cash, and you could only buy stuff at the company store, and it happened that you could just barely get by. Anyway, it was a whole mess. But the idea of a company buying up a whole bunch of property and then letting people, like employees and families, move in is not new. And it carried on. People, they still did it. Much less egregiously. And back in the 50s or 60s, one of the two, there was a company town that was built, and it was decent. We're not talking little ramshack, just hastily thrown up. We're talking a decent town. Paved roads, good, reliable utilities. Private enterprise was allowed to, people could rent stores and start businesses. It was a functioning town. And all of it private property. You couldn't buy property there. You couldn't buy a house. You had to rent. But it was really only meant for employees anyway, so whatever. Thousands of people lived here. Dozens of businesses operated. Grocery stores, shopping, big box stores, groceries, pharmacies, doctors, physicians, all the whole works. Really a functioning town. And the company owned the roads, the sidewalks, all the buildings. If you wanted to do business there, you worked with the company, you paid them rent, you rented a storefront or whatever. And for residents, generally speaking, you needed to be an employee of the company. But whatever, it worked. And it wasn't really egregious. They weren't ripping their workers off like the old gold rush companies did. But something interesting happened. A woman, and I forget if she was a Jehovah's Witness or a Mormon. She was something religious. And she decided that she was going to go hand out pamphlets, stand on a street corner in this town, and, just stand there, politely talk to anybody who wanted to talk to her, which wasn't many people, as it turns out. And she wanted to hand out flyers, which she did. And by all accounts, she was very non-disruptive, courteous, didn't get in people's way, and, pretty harmless. Well, the powers that be that owned the property, owned the town, they decided they didn't like that. And so they sent their own police department, they sent their cops to have a word with her and tell her, you're not welcome here, you need to leave. And if you come back and do this again, we'll arrest you for trespassing. Well, she didn't want to pick a fight with them, of course, and who wants to get arrested? So she complied and she left. Now, it's unclear what happened next, but I get the feeling she probably just talked to friends or her church or a lawyer or whatever, and they said, oh, you totally need to go back. And we'll have your back when they do what they said they're going to do. So she went back and stood on the very same street corner. And when they came to threaten her with arrest if she didn't leave, she asserted her First Amendment right. She is in a public place. She is not causing any kind of disruption or breaking any laws. And she has a right to be there, especially not just free speech, but freedom of religion. And their response was, no, you're on private property and you're under arrest for trespassing. You were warned not to come back. You're back. We're going to arrest you and prosecute you for, breach of the peace or for trespassing, whatever they drummed up to charge her with. And they did. They arrested her and they charged her. They, pretty sure they fined her and just booted her out of town. She just got, handcuffed, dragged to the station, booked, thrown in a cell for a couple hours to stew and whatever, and then they cut her loose. Well, that's all she needed, and that's all her church needed to go absolutely apeshit on them. And they sued, and she sued because they violated her freedom of speech. And that went all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court made a ruling that set a precedent that still applies today. And it should become clear pretty quick why I think this applies to the very same scoundrels that are complaining about this ruling in Texas and the appellate court. The Supreme Court decided in favor of the woman in this particular case against the city against the company rather, because yes, technically speaking, they did own the property that she was standing on. They owned the roads, they owned the sidewalks, the buildings, the whole works. However, it was not a gated community. There were no access controls allowing people in or preventing people in or out. It was not posted that it was private property and only authorized persons could even be present. For all intents and purposes, despite the fact that private dollars owned and maintained that property, it was a public space. Because there were no alternatives. Anyone was free to come and go. There was nothing blocking you from driving into this town and doing business there. They invited people from outside to come in and set up shop and do business. And so, quite clearly, this was not an exclusive club. You didn't need permission to be there. And no one stopped you if you went. You could just drive right up, park, and do whatever. And so the Supreme Court held this is a de facto public space, and you had no right to infringe on this woman's First Amendment rights to express herself freely and to practice her faith. And so she won. And boy, that pissed off a bunch of people, but who cares? She won. The precedent set was that the technicalities of who owns a specific chunk of dirt, physical, that is, and I think this still applies to digital space, but we'll get to that. No matter who owns a particular chunk of dirt, if you allow it to serve as a public place. Let's say you own a park. If it's open to the public, it is a de facto public space, and it is subject to the same rules and laws that a government-owned public space is subject to. And that's a very important and very good ruling. Because you know what would happen. If the Supreme Court had ruled the other way, well, every company on earth, every single property, every bit of land in America would have just been sold to a company. And then, you know what? The Constitution doesn't apply because you're on private property. Fuck you. Nah, that's not how this works. Now, the reason that I'm pretty sure this extends to the digital realm, and that's what the appellate court also seems to think, and I approve completely. This goes back to the classic argument about, Twitter banning people. The retort is, when you complain about getting banned or censored by Twitter, it's always, well, it's private property. They can do what they want. If you don't like it, you go build your own. We'll ignore the fact that they attack anything that other people build. Because, they label you a bad guy. They get you banned. You go somewhere else. Now they label that somewhere else as bad because they harbor bad guys. It's such a scam. But the private property argument comes up again. Now the question is the private service called Twitter private, or is it a de facto public space? There's arguments to be made both directions. It is a private service. It is owned completely and operated by a company, by a private entity. There is an ongoing cost in operating that private property or that private service. And it does stand to reason that you should not be compelled to allow people to commit abusive behavior using your property. And, that's the truth. If somebody steps onto my property at my house here and decides they're going to start, shooting a rifle into someone else's house, oh no, I can get pretty pissed about that, and I'm entitled to boot their asses off the property, preferably with my own shotgun in that case. But anyway, on the other hand, my house is not a public space. I don't invite people here to shoot guns at other people. I don't invite people here in general. Really, ever. Fuck off. My house. Go away. I'm kidding. I'm actually pretty friendly, and I don't bite people's heads off. I promise. I'm a very nice guy, despite my online presence. However, Twitter is offering a public service. They don't discriminate when you sign up. They don't say Twitter is a social media site for liberals or only for people who tolerate diversity. No, they say Twitter is for everyone. And it's free. You can sign up for free, and they don't stop you. Anyone is allowed to come here and play. And there you go. That's a bit of a problem, at least in terms of trying to argue that, this is private property and we can do as we want. And now the counter argument to that is a shopping mall is also ostensibly a public place, even though it's privately owned. And there have been disputes about whether, for example, are you allowed to photograph or take videos in a mall? And are they allowed to kick you out if you refuse to stop doing that if they ask? In other words, are they allowed to ban photography and videography inside a shopping mall? And the answer is yes, even though it's a public space. And so people will jump to that and say, well, wait a minute, a mall can kick you out if you start shooting video or photo and they don't want you to and you refuse to stop. Well, sure they can. They can, absolutely. So what's the difference? Why Why is a woman allowed to stand on a public street and proselytize legally, but a photographer, a videographer, is not allowed to step inside a building and just take video and then get booted when he refuses to stop? There's an interesting distinction there. The reason that is so is that a shopping center or a mall is not presented as a public square or a public space where you can just show up and do whatever the hell you want. You're there to shop. Or, if you were growing up back in the 90s, you were there to socialize. You went to the mall if you wanted to hang out with people and talk and goof off. Things were a lot better in the 90s as far as shopping malls go. They were a lot more open and flexible about things. And hence, they were also very popular. But no, you're generally there to shop. And if you're not spending money at a shopping mall, they kind of want you to make room for people who might be spending money. They're not a playground. They're not a park. They're not advertising themselves or presenting themselves as a grand social gathering place. Twitter is. Twitter distinctly puts itself out there as the place to be to communicate with other people. It calls itself social media. Just the name, the term, implies that they want everybody there to be social, to start talking to each other. That is very different. If a shopping center, indoors with nice air conditioning, advertise themselves as an open space for the exchange of ideas, people can come here and talk, just hang out and whatever. By the way, if you happen to step into one of these fine stores, retail establishments, and do some business there, do a bit of shopping, that'd be great. But come on down, everybody can just talk, shoot the shit, down here at Spiff Mobiscum Market. It'd be a different story. And they wouldn't be able to kick people out just for taking pictures or video, because, well, no, you're basically allowing everybody to come and go and no expectation of what they're supposed to be doing. It's public. It's a public square. And so now we're back to Twitter. They openly invite communication. They advertise themselves as a comms platform. I've always believed that they have, from the beginning, I've always thought they are tiptoeing dangerously close to being regulated as common carriers. And I think they sidestepped that issue by clinging to Section 230 of the DMCA, which indemnifies a website or service from the actions of its users so long as the site takes reasonable action to prevent illegal activity and remove it when they encounter it. The compromise for enjoying that protection is that you're not allowed to editorialize. And again, now we come back to, is banning people for making the apparently offensive statement that men can't get pregnant. Yeah, let that one sink in. That offends people. Whatever. Is that editorializing? Or is that simply an act that disrupts the network and violates the terms of service, the community guidelines? I personally think it's censorship, and I think it runs afoul of Section 230 protections, and I also think it runs afoul of the First Amendment, which I do believe applies even to private networks because they are de facto common space. They are public squares that happen to be owned by a private company instead of a government. They let anybody in. They let any conversation happen on paper. And they selectively ban only certain people. on a very selective basis, on arbitrary criteria that changes from day to day and is enforced very unevenly. They're inviting trouble. These companies, they really shouldn't be testing their luck with this law in Texas. They've been spanked by an appellate court, and they're appealing to the Supreme Court. I don't think this is going to go the way they want it to. And I've laid out why. And the reason that I think it's so important that they be declared public utility, not even public utilities, that's garbage. I'm content to let them have their Section 230 exemptions and protections, but they need to back off with the editorializing. You want to ban people that are just spamming the same message thousands and thousands of times? Fine. That's disruptive. I'll concede that. That's an operational problem that that you should be able to address technologically. Denial of service attacks. Obviously mitigate those, ban those people. People trying to hack your service. Get rid of them. No question. But conversation? Pissing someone off? Absolutely not. The only kind of posts that they should be policing and getting rid of are child pornography and other patently illegal content. The only other stuff they should ever remove is by court order, and that's it. And if they editorialize any more than that, they should lose their 230 protections, because they're obviously abusing them. So I'm thinking, if we're lucky, if the Supreme Court hears the case, now it's going to be great if the Supreme Court says, nah, we're not listening to that. Then that means the appellate court ruling stands, and that's going to be delicious. Because then what happens? If it doesn't go forward and the law stands, or if it goes to the Supreme Court and it rules the way I think it will, that, nah, you guys are editorializing shit that you shouldn't be, de facto public square, there's really nowhere else for people to go besides you two big boys, you don't get to do this. So let's say that happens, or they don't certify and the appellate court ruling stands. What are these people going to do? What do you think these companies are going to do? Now, people have pointed out, of course, on the Register, in the comment section, oh my God, people are seething about this. Oh, and it's so delightful to see. And they're talking about, oh, that's compelled speech, you can't do that, and talking about, like, oh, well, that's okay, Texas doesn't need Google anyway. And that got me thinking, like, really? You want to do that? The companies have basically two choices. They can either play by Texas rules and not ban people just for saying that you're not a woman just because you cut your penis off. Or the alternative is they don't do business with Texas anymore. Imagine Google or Facebook or YouTube just range banning anybody from Texas, just geo-blocking them. Imagine sitting down at a computer in Texas and going to Google to try to search something, and it just says, fuck you. You're from Texas. We're not talking to you. What kind of a PR nightmare do you think that would be? They'll do it. I know they're stupid enough to do it, but think about the message they're saying, that they're sending with that behavior. We are so fixated, we are so desperate to maintain control and retain our ability to censor people at will by our standards that we are literally banning and cutting off anybody who lives in a state that prevents us from trouncing their freedom of speech. Good luck spinning that one. That's going to make these people look like complete assholes. Also, Texas is a big damn state, and there's a whole bunch of economic activity there. Not everybody who uses Google products and services is a free user. There are plenty of businesses that pay for, say, Google Cloud or Google Workspaces. They do email and domain registration and management and all that other shit for businesses. If Texas gets its way and Google decides they're not going to stop banning people, YouTube and all them, then Texas may well say, you're not doing business here then, fuck you. What happens then? These companies could be giving up millions, if not even $1 billion or more dollars in annual revenue if they just decide to take their ball and go home. And I don't care how woke you are as a company, and I don't really care how woke you think your shareholders are. People who have invested in these companies, they're going to be pretty pissy at the notion of these giant multi-billion-dollar institutions turning their backs on hundreds of millions, if not billions, in revenue. That's going to hurt their investment, and that goes against the fiduciary duty of a publicly traded company. Their first priority is to make money for the investors, protect the shareholder, be profitable for the shareholder. A company deciding to actively thwart the law and leave an entire state and chopping off all of that revenue because they don't want to obey a law, that's working against the interests of a shareholder. I see this getting really interesting. And I'm really curious to see where this goes. It's going to be real interesting if the Supreme Court doesn't even hear the case. If they just say, nah, the appellate court's right. Meaning it stands and that's law. That's going to be really interesting because then it comes down to, Texas squaring off against big tech. And it's not going to be much of a challenge. Texas is going to win. Because big tech needs the business. Let's not be stupid. It's going to be even more fun if it goes to the Supreme Court because that just always gets more attention, and it's going to have all sorts of people bitching and moaning about, private property versus public space, and it's going to bring a very fun conversation into the mainstream that I don't think these people want John Q. Public to actually have. They don't want us thinking about this stuff. They want us to think it's hopeless, that they're in charge, and we're just along for the ride. That's not exactly true. We're ultimately in charge. And it's time to start reminding these fools of that. Anyway, I've got a bunch of chores to do at home. And I'm just talking to myself in my garage in my nice, fancy, awesome car that I continue to love. So I'm going to call it quits there. 38 minutes. Jeebus. I babbled like an idiot. Well, thanks for listening, guys. And I will catch you on the flip side. Take care.